incredible honor to sometimes even reconnect with old friends, but also even meeting new people to discuss ideas and conversations. To me, it's one of those elements of contemporary society that is often missing, having face-to-face dialogue. And as I was thinking, and also something you might notice is that this is all basically analog. I didn't really want to think about the digital aspect because I'm sure on all of our persons right now, we probably have an electronic device with a map app somewhere in there. And that, we could have charted every single one of you from point A to this point. We could do that. But it's like, I like the idea of the slower way. And so we started thinking an idea of different artists and who were involved with mapping. So what I wanted to do is sort of just let each artist talk for about 5 minutes about their work. And then I'll go last and finish it up. And then we can ask some questions. So alphabetically, I will begin with Barabarafisher.
Okay. Well, I have two pieces. So this one right here, and that one over there with the pink. So this one is called El Nino. I started doing, I was fascinated with overhead maps for whatever reason. It's part of my journey.
Louder.
I did a bunch of paintings that looked kind of like overhead maps, more like street maps or subway maps. And then they somehow morphed into this thing about climate change. I'm not sure how, but they were still in the same format. And I did one that was called Ice Age that had, cool to warm, but they still looked like tangle maps, and I called them tangle mapping. And the more I worked on them, the more they began to look to me like inside thinking, like trying to remember things out of the back of your brain because they're very layered. And, we all know how that feels, right? You're like, it's right there, I can't quite get it. So, but then this other one over here is actually part of a series I did. It's called Icarus, and there's 4 of them. 3 of them managed to survive the flood. It's the only reason to survive. But I was just continuing with the idea of the tangle mapping and the layers of thoughts and all that. And using stenciling in here to offset the flowing. And they just turned into Icarus falling out of the sky, which isn't quite about mapping, but it all kind of relates back to looking into this deep space and mapping it out. So that's my 5 minutes.
I'm Luzene Hill in Cherokee. My name is Luzene Hill. I live on the Paul boundary in Cherokee. I was born in Atlanta and have been living in Cherokee a couple of times before now, and for the last 4 years I've been there, and I intend to remain there to further and continue the occupation of this land that my ancestors have been occupying since time immemorial. And that's not an exaggeration. That particular space, I live about 8 miles from our mother town, which is called Villa. And this piece is a map cabinet, or it was, with sewers, but that was in the Cherokee Agency BIA office around 1960. In the 1970s, a program of transferring responsibility from the BIA to the tribe based on the tribe's wanting to do it and also being proven that we could do it. When I was offered this piece, just to hold my paper in my studio, I said yes, of course, and then I saw it, and when I saw it, and with the history of it having been in the BIA office, I felt like boundary, and I thought, okay, I have to do something with this. I will say something really quick about boundary. Before I talk about this, I live in the Koala boundary, and that's what we call our home, our tribal land. And it comes from the name of Koala Town in the 19th century. The tribal land of the Eastern Band of Cherokee is not technically a reservation like all the other tribal lands every place else in the United States. Because the government did not take this piece of land and give it to us or put us on it. My ancestors did not go to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. We managed to stay in North Carolina in our traditional homelands. And we bought basically our land back in the 19th century, primarily through a lot of complicated legal maneuvers. And so we bought the land, it's ours, but we put it in trust through the federal government when that was an option for us, when we were designated a recognized tribe. So to get to this, before white contact in this area, boundaries for indigenous people were marked and made by nature, by river, by an outcropping of rock, by a valley, a gorge. Those created boundaries that were recognized by different tribal entities. And trees, especially chestnut trees in this area, were often used. This is a chestnut tree. The foliage around the floor is ground cover and moss. And so I wanted to express that the colonial patriarchal method of boundaries and mapping was not our method of marking. This example of artificially created boundaries and control and domination is no more. It's empty, it is devoid of purpose. And nature is taking it back. If this were a longer show, like a couple months, then I would have planned on having things actually that would grow over that time, so that this would theoretically become like a derelict car or an old house that the woods take over. And Indians at the time, we're now indigenous and we were Native American, but now, and we're actually Salagi Anakadui is what we call ourselves. But when we were designated well, not people actually, when the government put us in categories, they put us in the Bureau, the Department of the Interior. And when I was a teenager and I realized that, I was really offended because the Department of Interior is in charge of animals and the land and our schools, our language in particular, and with the help of chestnut trees and moss and sedum. That's it.
Okay, so these are two-dimensional maps physically, but maps really have endless dimensions intellectually. And I invite you, whenever you see a map in a textbook or on the wall, to think about all the different ways you can interpret it, because there's a surface level interpretation and then there's many other interpretations. I don't think of myself as an artist, so this is just my attempt to answer a question that I had, which was, what is the demographic transition in Asheville for Black people? Because that's actually the only data that I can get, because historically, we didn't count white people as a separate category in the US Census. We counted Black people and then everybody else. So if you were Latino, or if you were Asian, or if you were Native American definitely, indigenous is its own thing for sure. But if you were not, on a reservation, you were living in Asheville, you weren't being counted necessarily as indigenous. You were just not, Black. So in 1970, in the census, that was the last time. That was the earliest time where I could get good data. And 2010 is really the last year where I can get good data, because starting in 2020, the census distorts data at this resolution, and it's not really accurate anymore. So 1970 to 2010 is really the window of accuracy for this particular data set. And I'd seen maps that tried to show this demographic transition in other bigger cities, but that data wasn't available in Asheville, so I had to make it myself. And that's what I endeavored to do. And this is an experiment to see which works better. So this is one time series from 1970 to 2020, and this is a different one. And I really love time series because all I've done is present two different time points, but there's already so much more depth just from 2 points that you can start to think about, the stories that went into this transition. And yeah, I'm very happy that I made this. I haven't been able to find a good use for it, but I'd like to just get it out there and work on it, make it better, and connect with people that might be interested in exploring something interesting to do with this data. Yeah, thank you.
Can you explain what it shows? What it shows?
Oh, sure. Well, it shows the percent Black of the population in each census tract. So in each census block. So a block is an area surrounded by roads. So everybody lives on a block. Some people live on huge blocks, because if you draw the periphery of all the roads that you live on before you have to cross a road, there might be 900 people living in one block. Or there might be 3 people living in one block. So blocks vary in size, but that's the smallest resolution that the census counts. So there's nothing more specific than a block. And so this data is just showing the percent in each block of the population that is identified as Black in 1970 and in 2020 and in 2010. So that's what the data shows, and I've separated it in different ways to potentially tell different stories, or maybe they tell the same story. So that's
Can you speak to what's different about how you separated it, and also could you speak to how you said, what's the distortion you saw after 2010 that makes the data not?
Oh, the distortion is just that the census is worried about privacy, and so the block data can be very precise. You might be the only person living on your block, and so they've actually started to mix up a lot of the data and say there's 3 people living on a block when there's really only 1 person living on that block, or there's 3 women living on the block when really there's 15 men living on the block. So the data is somewhat distorted, not to an extreme degree, but at this resolution the data is no longer accurate for 2020. In 2010 it was still mostly accurate, so that's more trustworthy.
What would be the motivation in distorting the data?
The motivation is privacy, because people are worried that too much information is being leaked about who they are to public records. Unless, that's my explanation for why they did it. This is split in such a way that you can look at majority and minority and absence and complete prevalence, which is a very simple sort of statistical way of thinking about it, but maybe a more useful way of thinking about it. And then this is separated in a very common statistical way, which is called natural breaks, where the data is sort of separated. I give the number of categories that I want. In this case, I wanted 9, and then the data is separated into equal sort of proportions. Yeah. Thank you.
Briefly, this is a piece I did a while ago. It was 2012. But I work in commercial foil, so the material is a metallic, very flat material, and so I've developed more and more techniques over the years. This is sort of an earlier piece. But what I've done here is I've overlaid a map that was a map from like a Coney Island, a miniature Coney Island. We were living in Italy, and there's like a rocket ship and the trains, and there's sort of numbered spaces that you'd go to. So I just overlaid that across an image of people looking into some kind of exhibit. There's a gazelle's head over here. So they're either at the zoo or at the Natural History Museum, and they're looking into it. So the map, when you often go to a zoo or a Coney Island or a Natural History Museum, you're often handed a map, and then that's sort of this way to find your way around. So I've always been interested in zoos in particular, and what's the relationship of the map to what you're actually looking at? And so and I don't know if it works or not, but this is an image. This is these two images that are quite different, and so the piece changes throughout the day as the light changes. It also changes as to where you're standing. So that's pretty much what that piece is. It's pretty straightforward.
Why did two pieces that are little, but you can probably get the idea even from far away. This piece here, and then this piece over here. And it was interesting to think about bias and paradox and who's in the room. And it occurred to me that water would be interesting to map because it's objective. It follows the law of nature. It doesn't have a purpose of its own, like selfish nature. So this, I thought, okay, let's do two polar opposite approaches to humans and land use. So this one would be, I call it, hello, my name is Narcissistic Glyphosate Chemical Company. I think we know who that is. I drive from the Midwest. I drive and see cornfields with shiny signs that have logos of the type of corn being grown. And in here there's a little red in the center. The seed is injected with chemicals to try to keep pests at bay. The land is sprayed. So the company would create a shiny, presentation of their product, but in reality, water, soil, and chemicals are washed away. And in this illustration, you can see how the water hitting the soil doesn't have any structure; it's dead because of all the chemicals infiltrating it. So the water, when it rains, it actually hits the top layer and then just washes off. So it was fun for me to learn, I wanted to make this very ugly. And so, me having my own bias. So it was interesting to do this, and just learn everyone's objective in this. And then in contrast, my hero is Gabe Brown. He is a no-till farmer from North Dakota. Several decades ago, he inherited this land from his wife's family. And one year he couldn't afford the tens of thousands of dollars of chemicals needed to grow his crops. So someone suggested he do no-till farming. So he got rid of all of his combines and all the unnecessary material. Just got a tractor with a little trough to plant seed. And decades later, he has scientists coming to study the soil. He's repaired it. Everything's living in harmony. So this, I just thought of all the different, the mycelium and the microorganisms, everything that's alive and working together. So then when it rains, if you have a healthy structure like this, the water it's becoming part of that system. And so actually, there's no erosion because water's soaking into the land. And if everyone farmed this way, these solutions are here, we can absorb all of the carbon that humans emit into the air just by switching over to this. So Gabe goes across the country, he talks to farmers who are reliant on government subsidies. And in the red, because they have to, Monsanto has a kind of a slave trade going on with farmers because they have to buy their chemicals and seed from them. So if you switch over to this system, not only are we becoming part of healing the natural process, but you're also able to make a living. It's a win-win. Anyway.
So, Jeremy Phillips was unable to be here. He's a groomsman in a wedding, so he's out. Kirsten Stolley, who is the military piece out there, she is finishing up a long month's residency up in Philadelphia. So they weren't able to be here. Two other maps that, so we do have a map of the koala boundary, what Luzene was referencing. And so that was printed, that's part of the public domain, but that map is now in the collection of the UNC Chapel Hill, over in Chapel Hill. And then we also have this other map that Jeff just gave me, it's like a couple weeks before, and it's like there was space there, but it really shows what kind of the population map as it moves, right? So those, we have no idea who those authors are. I am the author of this and this piece here, which are really quite different takes on how to do mapping. This is actually a print from the original painting, which is roughly about a little over 5 feet by 7 feet tall. And it's a one-point perspective. And what the title of it is Overtopping. And so being originally from South Louisiana, I'm well versed to hurricanes and floods. You all living here in Helene, we're now all versed of, hurricanes and floods. But through the iteration of this process, when I put the kind of a strict demarcation down here, I kept thinking of this idea of a levee, thinking of Katrina, and watching all the incredible videos, and of course, and also visiting New Orleans. I still had family down there. But thinking about so the white water began to move through this, and then all these little kind of elements of fish and the flora, the fauna, whatever, that begin to pop up. Overtopping also, it's a double entendre. It also means when one person acts superior to another. So when you follow this white up here, you would come up here to a very white obelisk, which of course we used to have one here in downtown Nashville. So the rest of that you can determine, you look at it, please, there's a lot going on there. That's one of those process-oriented things that sometimes I forget how I even get there. So I love that part. This is a map of Asheville. And I started doing these maps during COVID when I was still teaching full-time at Mars Hill. I seem to have all that time just really teaching online for a bit and then just sitting around for hours on end. So I had this old book of atlases. I began drawing in my lap. And what I soon realized, and just allowing the process to work through, these organic shapes begin to form within the drawings themselves. And that's what I wanted to produce here, was that in many ways, Overtopping is about opposing forces, opposing ideas, opposing politics, and what have you. Where to me, this one is about, we're all one big organism, right? If we think about, we speak in terms, our developers, our city council, whatever, when they say, please, the heartbeat of Asheville, it's like we're talking about all these kind of metaphorical aspects. But each of us, if we think about this, we're traveling along all these roads and these arteries to get to our destination. So we are, in a way, this living thing. And that's how that part came to that. The idea, I also studied framing with a man from New York City, Bob Kulick. Bob Kulick is known for, he invented the wraparound plexiglass boxes, and also the metal frame pieces that you can screw together, the cheap way of doing it. But Kulick also, what he does is he actually would, I don't think he's alive anymore, I think he passed away, but he would do reproduction frames for the Met and MoMA, like from the King Louis XIV, the gilded pieces and all that, starting from scratch, and then learn how to distress them to make them look a couple hundred years old. Really interesting guy. But the whole idea that in the paintings themselves, when you put a frame on them, sometimes the frame, it's like, I'm all about, thank you to the framers and all. However, sometimes the frame, it just doesn't quite jive with the art, right? And when I even think of an impressionist painting like a Monet inside a King Louis XIV gilded, ornate thing, it's like, wait a minute, it just doesn't quite match up. Anyway, so that's why this frame is exactly the way it is. So beyond that, I want to thank Jeff for this incredible space. This is, we can't do things like this without spaces like this. So please, if you can subscribe to Little Animals, please find Jeff, $20 here and there, because he's doing a lot of this on his dime. It's on his energy, but the idea, like this clubhouse for ideas, this is what we can put on, because you're thinking about, once again, from Luzene's heritage of going back thousands of years. Now we're thinking about water, we're thinking about race, we're thinking about the military, and so on. It's just incredible, though, that we're part of this whole mapping organism. So thank you. If you have questions, please pull the artists aside. Otherwise, eat, drink, and be merry.